Thank you for coming. My name is Mark DeLaura. I'm a GDC advisory board member for the Advocacy track, software engineer background. Worked in the Obama administration as a senior advisor for digital media many moons ago, and mostly do ed tech cross with games these days. I wanted to explain to you what the heck a Karass is. Does anybody know what a Karass is? Oh, got a couple of folks here. Awesome. Well, I was really lucky to spend a little bit of time at the White House. And I met this guy, Jake Brewer. And Jake was one of those types of people you don't meet very often in life. He's like brilliant, kind, everybody wants to be his friend. He's pretty much befriends everybody. Unfortunately, he tragically passed away in a bike accident in a charity bike ride, which was super on brand for Jake. Doing something for somebody else, and he got hurt. So when his coworkers came to help clean up his office space, they found this sole Post-it note on his monitor, and it said, "Cultivate the Karass." And people were like, "What the hell does that mean?" I've never heard that word before. If you look it up, you'll find it in a Kurt Vonnegut book. And roughly speaking, it talks of a group of people in life who are distributed around the world doing something for the common good, all kind of running down the same lanes of the highway, but probably people you just meet once in a while in life, and you really need to like embrace those people and run forward together. They're people who will help you in your quest to do whatever it is that you're seeking to do. And so I think of all of you here and all the people on this panel as being part of our Karass. So if you think that games they should be able to be more, that games should be able to do more, that we should get better at the way that we make games, you're in the right place. You should meet other people around you in this room in your Karass. And I implore you afterwards to come to the Q&A space we'll have, which will be in the alcove 305, and have a chat with all of us. Because they're only going to have like 8 or 9 minutes at most to talk about the work they're doing, which is really just so far from barely enough. It's kind of insane. So you're going to get a little snip, and then please follow up afterward with the people who you resonate with most. And I'm going to get out of the way, but before I do, I want to make sure to tell you to silence your phones. And I'm sure you've heard this already, but you're going to get a little email about reviews, and please do those, because that lets us all come back the next year if we did well, or vice versa. And that's it. So I'm going to get out of the way, and we're going to get going with Cat Park.
Thank you, Mark. My name is Patricia Watts, and I'm the Director of Technology Engagements at the State Department, the Global Engagement Center, and I'm delighted to be here. The mission of the Global Engagement Center is to directly synchronize, integrate, and coordinate efforts of the federal government to recognize, understand, expose, and counter foreign state and non-state propaganda and disinformation. So today we will be telling you a little bit about 2 games that we created. The Technology Engagement Division serves this mission by identifying, assessing, testing, and implementing technologies against disinformation. So let's start with the definition. What is disinformation? Disinformation is the intentional creation and dissemination of deliberately false information with the intent to manipulate the policies or opinions of those who receive it. This is distinct from misinformation, which is false and inaccurate information in its dissemination, but without the intent to deceive. And some video games are being used to spread disinformation, like South Front, Smash the Nazis, which cast Ukraine as Nazis, and the crude parody of Fruit Ninja. My hope is that after hearing the definition of disinformation, you're thinking about how you may experience disinformation in the form of trolling, memes, manipulated media, sensation language, or clickbait headlines. My goal is to share our approach to games and to encourage all of you to think about how disinformation is cross-cutting at the intersection of some of the issues we've been discussing here at GDC: generative AI, climate change, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. GEC developed 2 media literacy games, promotion video games, Harmony Square and Cat Park. Both games are designed to build cognitive resilience to foreign propaganda and disinformation. Harmony Square and Cat Park expose the player to ridiculous versions of disinformation, grounding the storyline and action in a apolitical, non-judgmental, and empowering environment, but real-world tactics and techniques like memes, manipulated media, sensational language, clickbait headlines, and artificial amplification. Rather than debunking every instance of disinformation, increased media literacy skills allow customers to pre-bunk disinformation, helping them to analyze the veracity of the media they consume and share online. Studies indicate that games are among the best tools that can be helped to build the requisite media literacy skills. This strategy trains media consumers to identify those tactics in the wild so that when they see a provocative headline or a funny meme, they will stop, take a breath, and ask critical thinking questions like, who is the author? Why did they write this headline or create this funny meme? Why is the reactions they are hoping to provoke from me? This is pre-bunking. In Harmony Square, you will play the role of a chief disinformation officer, abusing social media to spread disinformation, using troll, emotional language, rage amplification, conspiracy theories, and polarization to magnify intergroup differences about pineapple on pizza. You win by sowing discord and preventing consensus building. Harmony Square is the freely available on computer or mobile browsers from harmonysquare.game. 2 social scientists from the University of Cambridge studied the game, finding that Harmony Square significantly improved the abilities of players to discern between reliable and unreliable information. And after playing the game, players were significantly less likely to share unreliable information on social media. Harmony Square is now playable in 18 languages and has been used to promote media literacy around the world. And there are supplemental media literacy lesson plans available also on the website. At the end of October, we launched our second media literacy promotion, Counter Propaganda and Disinformation game, Cat Park. In the North cityscape, you play the role of a disinformation agent recruited into a shadowy social media pressing campaign. You train with a group of eccentric activists with different media manipulation skill sets, creating sensational headlines, memes, and synthetic media, but a common cause: to bring down an outrageous public works project, a park for cats. After you destroy the fictional public square, Cat Park challenges you to knit the social fabric back together. Using the inverse of disinformation skills you learned earlier in the game, you educate your fellow citizens about the disinformation campaign and media manipulation meant to hoodwink them. So you use the headline features to confess that you were the one spreading the disinformation. You use memes to point out that it is ridiculous to attack a cat park. And you undo previous image manipulation. Cat Park leaves players with a hard truth. It is hard to put the genie back in the bottle. It is hard to convince people that they have been manipulated, but also that nothing short of social cohesion or ability to trust one another is at stake. The University of Cambridge, again, evaluated the efficacy of Cat Park, finding that it's even more effective at training players to discern between reliable and unreliable information. Those results will be published soon. In conclusion, I want to thank you for your time and your attention. Myself and my gaming expert, Paul Fisher, will be at A305 after this. I hope you enjoy the games. Please play them and also give us feedback and can envision ways in which you might want to use the games and the platforms to create global pro-social impact. Thank you.
Start coming from our land, and then where we gonna go? Y'all already to get our house, y'all already know. That's where we gonna go. All right, so let me say two things. Let me say two things. So one of the you want taxes? Okay, let me say two things. No, why would we want taxes? We pay. No, we can't. I told y'all not supposed to sell it.
All right, so that was a nice New York City high school student playing a game called Vox Pop that we made. In case you're curious, 18th century land use policy was what she was talking about. So that's what she was so excited about. And today I want to talk to you guys about two things. One was about Vox Pop, a game that managed to produce such fervor over such a boring subject, and a key lesson that we learned in making the game that hopefully will be of some use to you in your own endeavors. So Vox Pop is a historical LARP where players collectively figure out solutions to historical crises like the Pullman strike or the AIDS epidemic. And our goal with the game, though, was not to teach history. It does that sort of almost by side effect, but really the goal was to give students practice in civic discussion. So like, what are your political stances? What parts are open or closed for compromise? What are opposing views? Can you understand them? Can you come to consensus? That sort of thing. So really our goal was to have players flex those muscles for that kind of discursive practice that is so central to democracy. But if we wanted to do that, why did we decide to take them back to the 19th and 18th centuries, right? Why not do it today? So since the founding, and even before, American politics has largely revolved around consistent fault lines. That the same themes keep coming up over and over again, and that they have since time immemorial. So tensions between rural and urban, like that was around back then. That was around during, that's what Shays' Rebellion was all about. Who gets the right to vote? You know, that's Doors' Rebellion and many other things. So this is, the same kinds of issues keep coming up. So this gives us an opening where it may be hard to talk about current events, but events in the distant past when like folks were wearing knickers, like that's way easier. Like that's much easier to get folks to engage with that. So if you don't feel comfortable arguing about the role of armed resistance to the government right now, well, what if you're an 18th century disgruntled beet farmer from New England? Maybe it's a little easier to do it then. It doesn't feel quite as personal, right? No one will hold it against you. So like with any RPG, what we do is we slot people into into roles. We're going to get players into roles, and so what we do is we slot players into an ideological spectrum and give them a short bio to ground those ideologies in a relatable personal facts. So you might end up with somebody's a banker, a rich Boston banker, and on the other hand, you've got a rural farmer who is ex-revolutionary soldier and angry about the fact that he doesn't get to vote. And then in the middle, you may have some more moderate groups, merchants, shopkeepers, et cetera, who sort of are in between both of those positions, both ideologically and socioeconomically. So once we've done that, we get you to the heads on pikes phase. This is where we got to get players really engaged in their positions. We can't just have them read it off of a Chromebook. That's not going to work. So we need to really get them activated about what they're going to be discussing. So we put all the folks with the same ideology together, we pack them in, and then give them some proposals for solving the underlying crisis. Then we ask them to pick their favorites and say why. So getting this chance of sharing grievances and organizing a solution gets them fired up and into character. They start really connecting with the underlying thing, and they're like, yeah, that's right, that's what we're going to do. We're going to cut taxes, we're going to raise taxes, whatever it is that they're going to do. So at this point, you may wonder, like, why are we whipping them into a partisan froth? It's like, isn't that the whole point that we're not supposed to do? But basically, we're polarizing them so that they can have the experience of depolarizing later. We want them to be engaged in these things so they can actually have the conversation. We don't want them to just sort of like nod ahead, be like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. Like, we want them to engage with their character, but we also, whoops. Well, we'll get to that. But we want them to experience this process of like detaching from your own views and being able to depolarize. So once we've got you really like animated, fired up, you're enthusiastically sharpening your guillotines, you're ready to go. And so then what we do is we take you and we fold you into groups that are increasingly mixed ideologically. And we ask you to discuss the proposals again. So you're fired up, but now you're a mixed company. Like, you want to throw all the bankers in jail, sure, and appropriate all their assets. But the merchants are telling you, like, if you do this, then like the economy goes belly up. Like, you can't sell your beets anywhere. Like, that's going to be a problem. And so then you look at the banker, like, they seem like a nice guy. They seem to be willing to make some concessions. And so you sort of soften up a bit. And so usually by the time that the final vote rolls around, a compromise usually emerges, right? People don't stick to their original guns. They've gone through that process. Okay, so during the game, we're squeezing people through this kind of inverted funnel. They start off narrow and angry, get increasingly nuanced and flexible, ideally. And that's modeling the behavior that we want. But this is still all disconnected from their world, right? So they've solved the Pullman strike, but that doesn't have anything to do with their current situation. So you may be asking that, and that's a good question. And that's exactly what we ask them. We say, okay, so as an epilogue to the experience that you just had, well, we try to connect their experience to the modern day. So we say, like, how did your character, as a possible example, like, how did your character feel about violence and protests? Do you agree with them? Do you agree with them now? As a person, do you agree with them in the current day? What do you think about violence and protests? And is there a difference between the position that your character had and what you have as an individual now, and like in the current context of politics? And usually people at this point like catch on pretty quick. They get the idea, and they were able to sort of roll the conversation forward into the present day. They start naturally going like, oh, okay, I see how this connects. Let's take this to current issues. So, all right. So at this point, success. We've solved polarization. Done. No, actually, clearly not. It's not that simple. So we're not saying it's that easy to actually get people to cross real political fault lines. But letting players experience what effective civic discourse could feel like, to have an experience of that is visceral rather than purely intellectual and detached, might seem like a step in the right direction, right? Like that at least nudges things forward. And at the end of the day, like that's all we can really do is like nudge things forward in a democracy. Like we don't get to have like a total win. We get to just sort of push things in the direction that we want. Which brings me to the last point, which is eating your own dog food. Okay, so that was the game, but what does this have to do with activism? Vox Pop may not seem like a form of activism, but in our minds it is. As I said, we're less interested in teaching history than in advocating for open, good faith civic discourse. And in activism, you're often engaged in some form of persuasion. You need to convince people to do something that they don't want to do, and they feel that they have very good reasons for not doing it. So to persuade them, you need to develop empathy for your position, right? Like you can't just use logic. This disappoints me as a philosophy graduate, but it just doesn't work. Like you just got to use empathy. Like that's just there's no other way around it. But you all know this. You've chosen games as the medium for activism, at least your mediums, and games are about player agency. And empathy naturally falls out of games. That's just like a feature of them. Games ask you to do things in the world, and since we're monkeys with mirror neurons, we'll empathize with whoever is doing those things that we're asking them to do in the world, right? So like that naturally happens as part of game playing. So in theory, that's the easy part. But that being theory, it only works in theory. And in practice, players are going to instinctively reject anything that requires them to empathize with something that disagrees with their ideological priors, right? So as we were developing Vox Pop, we would sometimes lose sight of that and frame positions along our established ideological grooves, like middle-aged Brooklyn dudes, which is not necessarily the people who were going to be like experiencing this thing. Like pretty much guaranteed that it wasn't going to be middle-aged Brooklyn dudes who were going to be experiencing this thing. And we weren't looking at the experiences, framing them in those of the character or the player, right? Now, this is a very basic design lesson. Focus on the experience of the player. I mean, this is like the most basic lesson. It's not even like game design 101. It's like middle school game design, right? Like it's like the most basic level thing. But in games that have a political or persuasive component, it's much easier to forget that, right? Because like you are so convinced about your idea, like, right? Like it's hard to step outside of it. You're like, look, like I love this thing. I'm like, have you seen me? I'm spending all this time making this game all this effort. So like it's hard for me to step outside of it. I'm being given the nod to stop. So I'm going to try to wrap this up super fast. So what we would just say is that at the end of the day, you should try to do the same in your games. Like if you're asking your players to be open-minded and epistemically humble about what the game that they're entering, you should do the same thing towards them. Try to frame things along lines that they will make sense of, and not assume that they're going to have largely the sort of background that you are. Really try to do that process of modeling their own experience. And with that, I'm done. We can room 305 if you have any further questions. Thank you.
Hello, it's lovely to meet you all. I'm Sophie Artemigi, and I'm a disabled game dev. This is me in all of my glory. Usually when I give talks on disability, I talk to my fellow disabled devs about how better to assert ourselves in the industry. However, because you can probably tell by my accent, I have no clue what it's like to be a disabled game dev in the States. I am disabled, I am American, but for obvious reasons, I've never lived in America for long enough for me to experience the full experience of what it's like to be disabled here. So rather than sit and tell any disabled dev that may be here what they should and shouldn't be doing, I think my time would probably best be spent reaffirming the importance of disabled people in our industry, and then also talking about how we can create structure to better support our fellow disabled peers. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context to why I think I'm capable of talking about this. Last year, I released a game called Hookup. It was about a woman who matched with her high school bully on a dating app, and it did pretty well. We were #1 on the paid charts in the UK, yay. But while I was making it, I was hospitalized 5 times. I had to go through a course of chemo. I had to isolate for 5 months, and I had 2 internal organs removed 2 weeks before the game was supposed to be released. And all of this was happening during COVID. But it led me to do a lot of research into how this would impact my career going forward, because I'm always going to be disabled. This is always going to be a part of my career, the same way any of my other identities impact my identity as a game dev. And in doing that, I learned how to give myself the space to design games and do what I love, but also to protect myself and to make sure that I'm never sacrificing my health in order to make games, which to me is really important. So, according to a study done by Accenture, companies that are inclusive of disabled workers had 28% higher revenues, twice the net income, and 30% higher profit margins than their counterparts. Now, I understand that causation does not equal correlation. However, based on what I've seen in the industry, I believe that disabled people are so used to overcompensating that when we're given the correct accommodations, we actually outperform our able-bodied counterparts. And so everybody in this room has the utmost incentive to support their disabled peers. Or if you're disabled, to assert yourself and to tell people that, no, you need to take your disability seriously and it will make everyone's lives better. So a lot of accommodations, such as flexible hours, the ability to work from home, and physically accessible workspaces are becoming more and more widespread, which is great. However, a lot of the inaccessibility in our industry is very structural and very subtle. And so the changes that we need to make are ideological first, so that then we have the vocabulary and the mindset to go forward and make big changes that impact everybody in our industry. So now I'm going to go on to talk a bit about what that looks like and how we can do that in practice. So firstly, it's important to design games around disability. So we already design around platform, monetization process, and players. For example, I know all of you, if you've make mobile games versus PlayStation games versus Switch games versus PC games, you're going to design slightly differently from that. If you've been to any of the free-to-play seminars, they're going to say from the very get-go, you need to have your in-game economy in mind from the beginning. Also, if you're designing for a teenage boy versus a 50-year-old woman, those players are going to have different needs and different wants in their games, and we're going to give them to that. So why don't we do that for our teams? I'd argue that it's just as important to do that. And once you enact these practices, it allows you to be much more consistent in your development process. So how does this work? Well, first you need to understand what is the most worst case scenario that's reasonably likely to happen. For example, I can see a lot of you are wearing glasses. What if your eyesight suddenly deteriorates and you have to go through a period of surgery? Maybe you get a detached retina. What if you have a kid and they get ill for months on end and you have to look after them? What if you have a colleague who has asthma and they can't breathe properly for a few months, and so they have to change their entire way of living to accommodate these new restraints? Well, if you think and list about the worst case scenario of what could happen to everyone on your team, you then ask, is my minimum viable product capable if the worst case scenario happens? If the answer is no, you need to redesign your minimum viable product. It's unlikely that everything bad that will happen, but that's fine, because if things go well, you'll have time and you can scope up, you can add more things. The problem is, and I know that every single person in this room has seen this, if we scope too high before we decide to scope down, we'll always push ourselves that little bit further, and we'll always work that little bit over time. And if you're disabled, that could have really big impacts on your health. And even if you just need certain accommodations around childcare, it does still impact you and your dependents. And so it's important, rather than scoping down, to scope up as and when you feel like you're ready and your team is capable. The second thing I want to talk about is this cycle of distrust. So Project Include is a charity in the US, and it released a disabled workers report which studied disabled workers in the tech industry in this country. And it highlights that the individual ideological and interpersonal and institutional distrust is one of the foundations of discriminations within the tech industry. And again, based on personal anecdotes, because we don't have a lot of studies on disabilities in games, I found that this carries through very significantly. For example, because of societal insecurity, there is a higher proportion of freelancers who are disabled game devs in our industry than there are freelancers who are non-disabled. And this is kind of counterintuitive, because when you work for a bigger company, you get healthcare and all of those benefits. However, disabled workers often do not trust large companies to uphold their rights. And so they'd rather risk it on their own than give someone the power to stress them out and withhold something that they know they're deserving of. And so by creating these changes that allow us to have these conversations and have this level of trust with our disabled peers, we can create more parity within our industry. On top of that, there's the distrust that comes from poor communication. This is particularly true with neurodiverse people. Most employers don't take the time to figure out how their communication style is and what suits them. And then there's frustrations when there's a breakdown in communication and nobody understands what's going on. I'd really recommend watching a panel recently that was done by the charity Safe in Our World on neuroinclusion in the games industry. They had a lot of people who are specialists in neurodiversity in the games industry, which I am not. And it was really enlightening to see the ways that they want communication to change in order to make them more effective workers. Another thing which I know all of us have experienced is crunch. Crunch is just really inaccessible. Even if it's not extreme, you need to ask yourself, during a busy period, do your employees feel capable of taking time to go and get a blood test or go get a checkup? If the answer is no, you really need to reassess your production schedule to make things more inclusive. Here are my main sources. I really encourage you to look them up. Thank you so much for listening to me. It's been a pleasure to speak here. Thank you.
Bonjour, Nindinawe Maganidug, Wabishkimigwa, Ninsa, Indigenous Cause, and a gig Nindudame, Odawaza Gayagani, Nindaman.
Bonjour, Anangukwe, Indigenous Cause.
Just said hello, all my relatives. We're from the Ojibwe Nation, and we're going going to talk to you about Reclaim, a point-and-click adventure game we're making in the Ojibwe language. So I want to ask you a question. How many of you have heard of the Land Back movement? Yeah. Okay. If you haven't, watch Reservation Dogs. Well, what we're going for is the virtual Land Back movement. We're asking you, as we ourselves are thinking about making space for our Indigenous languages, which we are all sitting on top of in our monolingual English, and making aware of the land that we are all attached to. Even if your game is in cyberspace, it comes from us. We're all attached to a land and language that goes beyond this generation.
I'm just going to talk briefly about what Reclaim is. So we're like Fong mentioned, a point-and-click adventure game. Kind of the general plot is a sort of Alice in Wonderland or Spirited Away, following a young girl who's become lost in this mysterious dreamlike forest where times and space kind of blend together. And it follows her journey to get back home to her grandma. What's really important to us, in addition to being a language immersion game, is that Reclaim is sourced culturally, that it is fundamentally an accurate reflection of us and our people. So we're trying to include as much traditional ecological knowledge and as much of our stories that we can in our game.
I just want to give a shout out to our all Indigenous team, Alan Turner, who had to leave earlier, Renee Niho, I don't see you. Calling you out, girl. Okay, well, we're all nations. There's a lot of Ojibways, and Josh Heron, who we're borrowing from Bob's Burger, is a Texas nation. Acebun Parent and Andrew Muldag and myself are all Ojibwe speakers, as is Jordan Flata. So we're super proud of this kind of special moment, gathering these people together. I'll tell you, just like, this is my 30-second version of the Ojibwe language revitalization, which I've been doing for 30 years. You've probably also heard that Indigenous languages are dying. Well, don't believe it, all right? This language has made a comeback. I've been in this place for 25 years. I helped start the first immersion school there. I've seen all the elders, some of my best friends go on, but I've seen the young people take up the language. And we're growing. Yes. Yes, be part of this movement. Know about it. Yes, we're taking something back, right? So you might also heard of Chippewa. That's the misnomer. We're the people all around the Great Lakes. 300,000 at least. 2/3 of Native people are in cities. So we are really literally all over. We're also related to the largest language family in North America, Indigenous language family, which is Algonquin, which is what you see here. The Miami, the Wampanoag, all the way to the Cree, the Narragansett, the Arapaho, all have languages that have the same morphology. So they might be able to use our game too. So we've been working to really understand our place. The people want to also express that we are not exceptional to the place we're in. We're part of the web. And this is where we really connect with the climate change and environmental movement. Our stories reflect that deeply, but not in a grandiose way. You have to hear them over and over again. And then you get that feeling. That's the feeling we hope to convey in our game. Part of the web. We're just all part of the same web. Oh. And in terms of language, we also think the way language is taught mostly now is very colonized. It's words decontextualized. Who made up this thing about words anyway? What are words? What makes an utterance, right? So we do have a language software, which we think is really good. You see it here, but it only goes so far. We need the context. And our young people who, for most of them, I would say, video games is their main storytelling tool. They need to have that context of play to use their language, to really feel like they see themselves there.
So the process of reclaiming begins and ends with the community. And we've been really fortunate to be from the community that we're working with and the community that we're serving. So we've had lots and lots of people to draw on. So we started our game design phase, our pre-production phases, by reaching out to the community, looking to address their needs, and looking to them for ideas about what could be in the game. And hopefully the vision is that it ends with the community. As we enter playtesting, we'd like to start working with immersion students and instructors, and ultimately we'd like to see the game in immersion classrooms. This is just a little bit of, just a small taste of kind of what we were up to during our workshop and ideation phases with the community. It was really an intergenerational collaborative effort with all ages, recent high school graduates from immersion programs, as well as students that were still in those programs as young as 9 and 10, as well as elders in the community. And we had them come in and try different technologies and kind of do some different design activities and ideate. And then as we went on, it kind of became clear to us that we wanted to make a point-and-click adventure game. So we brought them into the design process for that as well. We had them ideate on characters and locations and scenarios that would play out in the course of the game. And then we took all of that material, the recordings of them presenting their game ideas in Ojibwe language, and the art and these wonderful, like you can see the Ojibwe language is on their very like ideation sheet. And we took all of that and kind of began to kind of compound it down into the documents that would become our puzzle dependency chart and our narrative design document. Yeah, so it's a really community-led effort that we're really hoping, we're just really excited about, and really excited about bringing it back to our community.
Okay, and to wrap up, I don't know what time it is. It's all right. Oh, 1 minute ago. Thanks, Mark. So we are making our main audience is the Ojibwe language learners and fueling that movement, our young people. And we hope the young people take the game home and show their parents how to use it, and they all get excited about it in their homes. But we want to invite you as human beings also to somehow reclaim and make space for this idea that we are all deeply connected to the earth as part of it, and all the beings here. One of our teachings is that a long time ago, we all used to speak to everything that was alive on our planet. I just want you to think about that and take that with you today.
We just want to end with a big thank you, both to our partners and everyone that came, and Mark for organizing this talk. Thank you all so much.
Hi, everybody. My name is Daniela, and this is Nick. And we are developing a Way Out game, and we are hoping that we are developing something that I ambitiously call a game changer. So can gameplay drive behavioral change? This is the question that we've been asking ourselves. It's a difficult question. Behavioral changes are the most difficult to tackle, but we were lucky to partner up with behavioral scientists from University of Yale and from UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Education and Peace to create a groundbreaking assessment tool to measure compassion and social emotional competency without interrupting the gameplay or story. So like the algorithm is embedded into a game, and that's how we can have a scientific data showing this behavioral change. So that's cool. Now, what kind of behavioral change do we want to create? So I've been not shy from tackling the biggest challenges that life gave me. So I decided to tackle the biggest public health and safety issue that has no prevention thus far. Does anybody know what kind of public health and safety issue I'm talking about? Nobody? Can you guess what is the biggest public health and safety issue? It's sexual harassment. Sexual harassment and sexual violence is the biggest public health and safety issue with no effective prevention thus far. The problem is much greater than we think, and the biggest is because I always not mind the statistic, but rather say, find me a woman over 30 that hasn't been sexually harassed. So that's kind of just give you the beginning of the picture. I've not been a stranger to the issue myself personally and professionally. I've been studying causes and consequences of sexual violence from gaining trust of a child abuser and pedophile to speak for my feature film about healing after sexual trauma, to being retaliated by my country for speaking up. Today is actually exactly 2 years since I spoken up about the crime I survived. So I was an actress, and I was held captive and raped by a powerful politician in my home country, Serbia. And I fled, and this horrific event kind of sparked my mission in life. I shared this story to, when I arrived to GDC, I shared my story to one of the GDC attendees, to his immediate interception, saying, yes, this is what happens to actresses. And I'm telling you, yes, for the people like that, we really need to make this game. Because men, especially young men, have they don't know, they don't care to know what are the causes and consequences of sexual violence, and they don't care to stand in solidarity or think about, like, how can I stand in solidarity? Yet, also, no young man will want to play a game about sexual harassment, definitely. So we decided not to build a game for good. We decided to build a game that players want to play, to meet them on their turf, give them all of the candies, basically, and kind of a joy and challenges of the gameplay. And to add a challenge, which is competing on compassion. We decided to put the player into a support role because when people kind of really see how difficult and very often dangerous it is to ask for help after these crimes, not only that they will kind of profoundly and innately understand how to be an active bystander, but rather also prevent them from making these crimes. And to kind of explain how the gameplay really works, here's designer Nick Fortuno from Playmatics to tell about this magic that he created.
Hi, everybody. So working with Daniela and learning about this issue, this idea of support was like this really critical piece, and the idea that support could be this pathway to empathy, and that empathy could be a pathway to change, right? Like that just understanding the position of someone else could do that, and finding ways to do that led to like sort of thinking about this kind of gameplay. And as Mattia did in his talk, I want to use this as an opportunity to just introduce a game design concept that I think is useful in these cases. So the core idea is to try to make something that would be commercially viable with that audience level, and that means making something kind of core. And so Danielle and I talked a lot, and I talked with my game design team about like, well, what are positions where you have support? And then when you just say that word in a modern gaming context, it like jumps out immediately. Oh, that's a role. That's like a role in a game, right? It's a role in a MOBA, right? It's a role in Apex Legends. It's like there's a character that plays support, and often people play in that role. So could we make a game where that's just your entire role, but all you do is support, so that reinforces the lesson? Now, part of that is coming from an idea that we would be, like reinforcing the lesson through the gameplay, which is like kind of a standard kind of thinking about games for impact that the gameplay should reinforce. And so to do that, we're sort of innovating this mechanic where you're a firefighter and you have a firefighting team, and the team is going out to sort of like put out these wildfires that are spreading across this island. And to do it, you serve in a support role while your team actually puts out the fire. You support the team as they do it in a MOBA-like triangle, right, where you're last hitting and like using buffs on the players around you. And that's not a mechanic that exists, right? There isn't a single player support MOBA. And that's like the kind of one underline I want to do about this lesson. There's a reason why we're doing that, and that's because to make a commercial game that's gonna do a kind of impact lesson, you have this challenge where if you try too hard to make something that's like another commercial entity, you end up just getting stuck being an also-ran in that category. It's very hard to differentiate. So my approach to serious game design has always been to innovate, because if you're looking to make a commercial success, you have a better chance of doing that if you innovate the mechanic and you can get attention for the mechanic. And especially, as Daniela said, because the target audience will not be interested in the issue, we need to get a game that they would be interested in, and the easiest way to do that is to do something new. Even though that sounds more difficult, and the reason why you're seeing very early prototyping is because we're taking a long time prototyping this mechanic, it gives you an opportunity to tell another story about the game that could potentially draw in an audience that wouldn't play it otherwise. So you bring your team out and you take care of fires, but in the interstices, in sort of like a traditional level-based game, you deal with your team and you have to build trust with your team. Again, sort of typical to games like Dragon Age and Fire Emblem, you have to make your team work, and so then your team is going to talk to you. But some of the things that your team talks to you about are troubling and difficult, and then you have to learn how to navigate them. So in this case, Anna approaches you after a battle and says, "It's hard for me to talk about it. It happened many times, and I didn't know how to avoid these constant. I felt like a toy to him. I reached out to higher ups and nothing. That's why I got transferred," right? Which in a game context of being in an organization should be kind of a shock, because no one ever talks about that in a system like that. And then,
yeah, how would you like to respond to that? So you have A, tell me everything. Tell me what exactly happened. You have B, when did this happen? Is it still going on? You have C, what do you need? And you have D, Anna, that sounds horrible. I'm so sorry. Was it rape? How many A's do I have? Nobody wants to play this. B's? B, we have 1B, 2B, 3B, 4B. How many C's? And how many D's? Okay, great. You guys are amazing. Yes, the correct answer is C.
And so Way Out is basically a game that revolves around those topics, right? And it does that as a way of getting you to listen to someone who's been a survivor and then deal with the conflicts that come from that, whether it be other teammates who don't agree, an organization that will back you down, or just dealing with the vicissitudes of what a healing process can be.
Yep. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I think I'm next. Yeah, even though that's not me. But I wish I looked like that. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, and in particular, the Boonwurrung people and the East Kulin Nation, which is a place in Australia, which is where I'm from, which is where I do my work and where I live. My name is Stephen Dupont. I run the Institute of Games and Solutia in Australia, and they are two organizations that work at the intersection of youth development and gaming. And here to present my project, Streets of My Town. I'm a youth worker that's my background. That's how I came to this. I'm not a game developer. And as a youth worker, you're trying to empower young people to overcome their challenges, right? And look, that's not always easy. And Streets of My Town was born out of two challenges that we faced as youth workers. One of which is that young people hesitate to seek help. I think it goes for everyone. I think everyone hesitates to reach out for help. And for us, it's a real problem, because the longer young people wait to reach out for help, the harder it is to do the right interventions with them. And we've researched why this is, and it's fairly simple. Like, they usually don't really know about us. And if they do know about us, they don't really understand how we are going to help. We might tell them we're going to do counseling, or we're going to do youth support. And for a young person, a 14, 15-year-old, that doesn't mean a lot. It's very difficult to explain that. And so as a youth worker, what we did is we go into schools and talk to groups of young people and try and explain the value of our services. And you can try and talk to a group of 15-year-old boys and talk about counseling. Their eyes just roll back in their heads and they just jump on their phones and they're really not interested. And that's really what sparked the idea. Like, can a game really help us with this? Can a game explain what we do and show what we do? Not just tell young people, but really be involved in that process. So we got together as a bunch of youth workers, came up with this idea. It was going to be a city builder, and you were going to run a youth organization and help all the young people in your city, and the city will flourish. It's a great idea, like so solid. Went out to game developers, to game development studios, and got some quotes for it. And then we pretty much fell over backwards because, second problem, making games is so expensive. And so I was running small not-for-profit youth organizations at that time, and we just did not even come close to the budget that we needed to build a game. And so I thought that was a real challenge, and the two problems combined really sort of inspired me to start probably about a decade-long journey into trying to make a game. Because my project was pretty much shelved just because I didn't have the budget for it. But in that time, I really got to refine the ideas. It's not a city builder game anymore. And also really think through a business model for this, because given the budgets, it would have to be a sustainable model. And the idea was then to really, like, if one small not-for-profit can't afford it, there's a lot of youth organizations spread out over Australia, spread out over the world, and they all have a little bit of budget maybe. So if we can just pool that money, create a product that's usable for all these organizations, then maybe we get something sustainable from this. And so over time, that really percolated and really matured as an idea. And so here are some of the main key points that I thought were going to be important in our design. So obviously, low budget and sustainable. The unique selling point for Streets of My Town is that we localize things, not just the way game developers localize. We localize to a specific town. So we recreate the people who work in that town. We recreate landmarks of that town. So when a player starts to play their game, they can recognize and they can see that this is a game about their specific environment, and it really relates to their unique space. It should be really easy to roll out in different towns or different areas. So we can build new stories that are co-designed by the people who live there, and co-designed by the people who have a lived experience with the issues that we're trying to talk about. And that is very, very important for us, because as a white, middle-aged male, I'm not equipped to tell these stories. So we have to bring in that narrative, and we have to bring in that expertise. It should be narrative-based, because what we're trying to explain is complicated. So we need sort of the space to do that in. And so I'd like to show you what it ended up looking like. So this is the trailer. If I can get it to play. Here we go.
Yeah, I block every day, I'll be there. Now we in the game like EA. Said that it ain't that easy, but we keeping it 100 like a freeway. Don't need a tick, just do it. You know that you're linking with a moment. Say what they want, see how they feel. We gon' let it slide, move on up, Curtis Mayfield. On the run, we can't get enough. You know that I'm hollering love, hollering love. And I know it get tough, so let me hear you holler. On the run, and we can't get enough. You know that I'm hollering love, hollering love. And I know it get tough, so let me hear you holler. I'm hollering love, let me hear you holler. I'm hollering love, let me hear you holler.
So this is in essence a Unity project that we have, and we've got a bunch of tools and art assets obviously available, and we're building on this every time we roll out a new project with a not-for-profit. Some of the case studies that we've done, our Big Bilik, which stands for My Place, which is built with local Aboriginal people in Melbourne. And we worked with the Centre for Multicultural Youth, for example, as well, and that was with a group of South Sudanese young people. And so we get together in a room and we really workshop what the story is, what the narrative is, and the outcomes that they want to achieve through the game. And then we wrap some game design around that and put it into our platform, really. Where we want to take this is, keep building it, and because we need partners, we need not-for-profits to use our product, and we want to continue to bring the price down. The more times we can roll this out, the cheaper it will become over time to really use the product. And we're building out some really easy storylines that are general, which will have a dashboard that sits sort of in the back end, which a client, a not-for-profit organization, can just go in and type in their details, type in the names of the workers, and type in the opening hours of their service, and all those kind of details. So when a young person plays the game in that location, they will get the appropriate information, the right information of the youth service or any other service that's available in that space. So get in touch if you're interested, and that is my talk. So I don't know, Mark, are you going to come up and do a last minute? Thank you very much.
Ooh, oh, we hit it on time and on budget. I'm getting a 1 minute from the back, so thank you everyone for coming and speaking and telling us all about the great work you're doing. And thank you all for coming. And of course, fill out the surveys. But more importantly, if there were things that you were inspired by, I hope you'll stay and chat with some of our speakers. We're going to go over to the Alcove 305, which is over here somewhere. And I hope to see you there. Thank you very much for coming. Enjoy the rest of the conference.